So quick forewarning, this video does involve a bit of ranting and complaining and negativity. I know you guys don't always like those types of videos. You're like, oh Paul, you're too negative, you're always whining. So if you don't think you can handle it, it's just gonna be too much for you, you can head out now. But for those of you who have a backbone, in today's video, I'm gonna talk about 5 buzzwords that Yu-Gi-Oh players use way too much. So what is a buzzword? A buzzword is basically like just something that's kind of a sensational word. It gets overused and sometimes kind of loses its meaning in the process. I've got 5 of them that I hear when I go to Yu-Gi-Oh events. I hear them in online arguments, and I just think they get thrown around a bit too much and people maybe don't understand exactly what they're all about. First buzzword, tier 0. If a deck is tier 0, it means it's like extremely dominant, extremely, like it completely takes over every tournament that you go to, and it's unbeatable and it's so strong and no other deck can compete. And tier 0 is a real term in gaming, in fighting games and card games, things like that. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, we kind of designate things as like tier 1 or kind of the current best decks. I guess right now that might be something like, Goki's, Altergeists, Sky Strikers, maybe a little cut above those, and Trickstars. And then like tier 2 are the decks that are, competitive, but kind of rogue more so. I don't know what that would be, maybe Pendulum Magicians or Burning Abyss. These are just kind of rough guesses. And then so on and so forth. You might even hear some things like, oh, tier 1.5 is like kind of between that, whatever. But tier 0 is this idea that the deck is completely dominant and unstoppable. And, so some common examples that people will point to. Decks like Spirals in their prime later last year. Decks like Zodiacs in their prime. And for me, those are actually great examples. They were played in literally everything. They won nearly every event. And not only did they win these events, they were oftentimes the by and away most represented decks at these events. Spirals are the same way. But tier 0 is something that I hear people talk about when they're referring to decks that oftentimes aren't even out yet. Oh, this deck is gonna be tier 0 because the OCG, it's really dominant there. You'll see it used in clickbaity YouTube titles where it's like, oh, is this deck got new support? Is this a new tier 0? I mean, I'm serious. I do think that people overuse this word. I think that just because a deck is strong does not necessarily mean it's tier 0. I think that you can't determine if a deck is tier 0 just because it wins one event. A really good example was Pendulum Magicians actually earlier this year. After the recent ban list we got that nerfed Spirals and stuff, everyone's like, okay, Pendulum Magicians are gonna just be the best deck. And then they got a lecture mind, people are like, okay, it'll be tier 0 for sure. But then what we kind of ended up finding out over time, just in the last few months before it got hit, is that Pendulum Magicians did not actually completely dominate every event. They had their own set of problems dealing with hand traps. They had their own set of problems dealing with True Dracos, which started to pop up later in the format. They didn't actually take as many spots at events as people thought they would, and it didn't really end up being, I think, what most people would call a tier 0 deck. A very strong tier 1 deck, and probably the strongest of the format, but not tier 0 because not everyone played it and it wasn't seen as unstoppable. I think people get this sensationalist idea of tier 0 decks, and I don't really know why. I mean, maybe it's to to pump up prices, maybe it's price hiking, I don't know. Or maybe that's just how people feel, but I think that tier 0 is a term that gets thrown around just a little too much. Next buzzword is unhealthy. So this comes up a lot when people are talking about ban lists, or when people are talking about just the format and certain annoying cards in it that they don't like. So you'll hear someone say something like, oh, this card is unhealthy for the game. And I think that no one really has a great definition of what unhealthy means in a Yu-Gi-Oh context. Say evenly matched, right? Or Scapegoat right now is a popular one. Trickstar Reincarnation, that's another good example. These cards are unhealthy for the game. But can anyone really say what unhealthy means? I mean, does unhealthy mean it's, really sacky? Does unhealthy mean that it doesn't let the opponent play? Does unhealthy mean that, it's too expensive? Does it have to do with price? Is it a contextual thing? It's unhealthy only when used in this deck or this strategy? What's kind of the story there? Now, that being said, I have used this term in the past. An example of something that I think is unhealthy right now is Trickstar Reincarnation with Drone Lockbird. That interaction between those two cards doesn't feel healthy because it's not actually how either card is exactly meant to be used, but when used together, it becomes very, very powerful and just breaks how the card is supposed to work. It will vary from person to person, so I don't want to say this is one of those ones where it just doesn't belong in the game, you shouldn't use the term. I think that some definition does go a long way in this case. Third term is auto lose. This is one that kind of just triggers me a little bit, because whenever I hear people talking about a current top tier deck or a certain matchup, they'll say this deck auto loses to this. It auto loses to a certain card, a certain floodgate, a certain other matchup, right? Altergeist auto lose to Red Reboot. I don't know, you might hear someone say that, or Pendulum's auto-lose to anti-spell fragrance. But that's rarely true. If you watch live streams of YCS events or nationals, things like that, you'll oftentimes notice that games don't actually end like in one turn nearly as much as people make it out to be on the internet. Rarely do games just go like, oh, okay, the other person scoops immediately because someone flipped a floodgate on them. Top players, the players that really win these events and go far, don't just give up completely like that. A lot of people realize that matchups are nuanced and have layers. Even if a matchup isn't good for a certain deck, it doesn't mean that they can't play it out and try to win it. I think too many people use this as a bit of an excuse. You're kind of validating a loss because, well, you couldn't have won anyway, it's auto-lose. And there are powerful decks, matchups that feel unfair or powerful floodgates. The thing is though, is the best players do try to plan around them, play around them, and account for them. You can get rid of floodgates with Cosmic Cyclone, Twin Twisters, Storm Duster. There are ways around these things. Hand traps aren't auto-lose. Just because you get Ash Blossom doesn't mean you automatically lose the game. I get it, Ash Blossom's a strong card, but you can bait it out. You can try to play around it. I think that when people just say that X thing auto beats a certain deck, again, I find it to be more of an excuse. There are matchups that can feel very close to an auto-lose situation, but they're fewer and further in between than you probably think. Meta. Now, meta is a word that it's a real word. It has an application, it has a use, it means something, and people should use it when they're trying to talk about, the metagame. But I oftentimes hear players, they'll refer to basically anything that's just better than their deck as meta. I've heard people in 2018 say things like, Cosmos are meta or Burning Abyss are meta, like when they lose to them. I might be playing on Wygo Pro and I'm using Zephyras or Burning Abyss or, Mermails even. And when I win, they're like, well, you just won because you're using some broken, stupid, meta deck. And I'm just like, wait, what? These decks aren't meta. I think that everyone knows, Burning Abyss, it's like a strong rogue deck, or Infernoids, those are strong rogue decks, but they're not meta decks in the sense that they're not the tier 1 topping, winning, constant, consistent threat decks. I think maybe people mistake meta with stuff that was meta in the past, and they kind of just feel like it's always meta because it's always beaten them or they have a bad matchup against it. The meta is a much more fluid, nuanced, sophisticated thing. There are cards and trends that will change. Right now, there are certain tech cards that probably won't actually be as popular in a few weeks, and there are tech cards that kind of go in and out of fashion. That's the beauty of a metagame. It means that people do adapt. That's kind of what I define as a metagame. It's the small trends, and the best players are the ones who do, they really keep tabs on it and really keep a finger on the pulse of the metagame, what's happening, what the trends are, what cards are going in style, what's popular right now, what's kind of not, what aren't the threats. To just assume that decks that beat you are meta is, I think, selling it short. It means you're not really understanding what it is, and you might not be putting your best foot forward and beating it because you're not actually aware of what that means. And the last buzzword is co-money. So people say this, and I get it, it's kind of more of a meme at this point, but it's this idea that, Konami does everything purely for greed and money, right? People think that every set just has everything's short printed and they make all the good cards secret rares so that you'll never get them, and so the prices will be super high, and you'll just have to buy more and more product because they're evil and they hate us. And same with ban lists, right? You'll hear people say oh, the ban list was, it just bans all the old stuff and just keeps the new stuff safe, so you're forced to buy the new cards, and it's money, they just want money and all that stuff. And these things are kind of true, right? The best cards tend to be secret rare, evenly matched, impermanence, Ash Blossom, Sky Striker Engage. They're hard to get. That's how most card games go, though. I don't think that that's unreasonable of Konami to want to make some chase cards harder to get, so you'll buy more of their product. Go figure, it's a business. Businesses need to make money, and that's kind of how it works. The ban list, yeah, it's a fair argument. Oftentimes new decks tend to be spared from the ban list, but products are products. They have to keep the game moving. I think this is all pretty understandable. I get that short prints are very annoying, and I totally agree with that point, but I think that people kind of mistake Konami's, lack of benevolence as just this idea that they hate the players and they're just completely greedy. But people don't give Konami enough credit. Look at Battles of Legend Relentless Revenge and Light's Revenge from last year, and Legendary Collection Kaiba. Lots of great reprints that people can get, and people, whenever we see these reprint sets, everyone's like, whoa, this is awesome, this is the best reprint set of the year, the Megatons are cool, and Relentless Revenge is cool, I want it. Thanks to Konami for reprinting all this stuff, but then the next day it's oh, they hear that some card is secret rare and now they're mad at Konami again because they feel like it's co-money and they're evil. That's so hypocritical, I feel. If you really think Konami's evil and just hates you, then I guess, I don't know, don't ever buy any cards or just don't play the game. But I think that that's just not fair. Konami does a lot of good things. They don't do everything perfectly, but to just assume that they only want your money and care nothing at all about the players, that's a bit of a stretch to me. So I think, you know, I get it, people use it kind of more humorously these days, but Konami isn't really accurate, so I kind of find it to be a bit of a buzzword. Like I said, this video was kind of more of a rant, so I'll get that people will disagree with it. Let me know in the comments, and what do you think? What are other Yu-Gi-Oh buzzwords? Am I maybe wrong about some of these words, and like I might have just I might be over-exaggerating, overreacting, or I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm used to reading that in the comments. Anyway, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! I've also got a giveaway of a box of Battles of Legend Relentless Revenge, thanks to TCGPLAYER, coming up, so be sure to make sure you're following the channel so you can get details on that, because that's a great set and I do want people to get access to it, and I haven't done giveaways in a while, so more details on that soon. All right, it's gonna be it. I'll see you guys in the next video.